Hello students, welcome to another session of Ecosystem. In the previous sessions, you have learned about the structure, composition, and certain functions of an ecosystem. Let's see what is ecological succession. An important characteristic of all communities is that composition and structure constantly change in response to the changing environmental conditions. You might have observed this in your surroundings. This change is orderly and sequential, parallel with the changes in the physical environment. These changes lead finally to a community that is in near equilibrium with the environment, and that is called a climax community. The gradual and fairly predictable change in the species composition of a given area is called ecological succession. During succession, some species colonize an area and their population becomes more, whereas populations of other species decline and even disappear. The entire sequence of communities that successively change in a given area are called seeds. The individual transitional communities are called as seral stages or seral communities. In the successive seral stages, there is a change in the diversity of species of organisms, increase in the number of biomass, and an increase in the number of species and organisms. The present day communities in the world have come to exist because of succession that have occurred millions of years since the life started on Earth. Actually, succession and evolution would have been parallel processes at that time. Ecological succession is a gradual process. It can be of two types: primary succession and secondary succession. Primary succession begins in an area where no living organisms ever existed. Therefore, the establishment of a biotic community is very slow. Example: newly cooled lava, bare rock, newly created pond or reservoir. It takes natural processes several hundreds to thousand years to produce fertile soil on bare rock. Secondary succession begins in areas where natural biotic communities have been destroyed. For example, abandoned farmlands, buried or cut forests, etc. Since soil is available, it's a faster process. The species that invade depend on the conditions of soil, availability of water, environment, and seeds or other propagules present. Description of ecological succession usually focuses on changes in the vegetation. However, these vegetational changes in turn affect the food and shelter for various types of animals. Thus, as succession proceeds, the number and types of animals and decomposers also change. Based on the nature of habitat, plant succession is of two types: hydrarch and xerarch. Hydrarch succession is the plant succession which takes place in wet areas or water, and the successional series progress from hydric to the mesic condition. Hydric means too wet condition and mesic condition means medium water condition. Xerarch succession is a succession which takes place in a dry area, and the series progress from xeric or too dry condition to a mesic condition. The species that invade a bare area are called pioneer species. Let's watch a video on primary succession in water.
Take a simple pond. In the initial stage, phytoplankton like blue-green algae like Spirogyra, diatoms, and bacteria are the pioneer communities. These algae are eaten by the zooplanktons, protozoa like amoeba, and paramecium and small fish like bluegill fish and sunfish. As these organisms die, their dead remains are deposited into the pond. Over time, the organic matter in the pond increases, and microorganisms utilize the decaying matter, releasing nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium into the ecosystem. This nutrient-rich soil in the pond then supports the growth of rooted hydrophytes, such as Hydrilla, Vallisneria, and Ceratophyllum. When the hydrophytes die, their dead remains slowly deposit in the pond and help drive the detritivorous food chain, adding to the nutrient content. The shallow water region of the pond is known as the submerged vegetation stage. Along with these hydrophytes, various invertebrate animals like dragonflies, mayflies, crustaceans such as cypress, cyclops, and daphnia slowly join the ecosystem. These flora and fauna further develop the complex food webs. Over time, as rains and wind bring soil and debris, causing silting, the depth of the pond decreases. The next stage of succession is inhabited by rooted floating vegetation, or plants whose leaves float on the surface and the roots remain in the mud, such as Nelumbo or lotus, Trappa, and Monocoria. In this stage, a diverse community of animals also come to inhabit the pond, like frogs, salamanders, snails, turtles, and snakes. Even insects inhabit the exposed leaves of the hydrophytes. Next come the free-floating hydrophytes, whose roots float in water. Plants like Azolla, Lemna, and Pistia are examples of this stage, which also add to the organic matter and depth of the pond. Slowly, the pond becomes swampy due to the increasing dead and decaying content. This stage is variously called the reed swamp stage, inhabited by typha, phragmites, and sedges like cypress and carex. With the reed swamp stage, the initial deep pond is transformed into a mesic habitat. Gradually, shrubs like salix and cornus invade this environment, further making the habitat less favorable for aquatic plants and animals, and more conducive for terrestrial species. Trees like populus, almus, and other such wetland trees occupy this habitat, which ends in the climax stage inhabited by deciduous species. This process of ecological succession takes approximately 200 years. For an aquatic habitat like a pond to transform into a woodland, there exists a number of intervening seral stages. Here, as we have seen, the submerged hydrophytes, floating hydrophytes, and shrubs exemplify the seral stages. Some seral stages might take longer than others to transform from one ecosystem type to another, such as from swamp to marshland, which could take several decades. In conclusion, succession is a dynamic process that is continually working towards a climax community. Nature, in essence, is striving to reach its highest state of balance and perfection.
Let's see how primary succession takes place on rocks. Lichens are the pioneer species, and the climax community is the forest. Let's watch the video to see how xerophytic habitat gets converted into a mesophytic one.
Primary succession is the colonization of newly exposed landforms such as sand dunes, glacial region, or lava flows after a volcanic eruption. Here we examine how nature turns a barren environment into lush, beautiful climax community. During the last ice age, the Himalayan glaciers receded, exposing barren rock that had once been covered by ice for tens of thousands of years. As the climate warmed, rain fell where snow once dominated. The rainwater combined with the atmospheric carbon dioxide and slowly corroded the surface of the rocks and created crevices. Sudden loud cracks and pops would have surprised anyone visiting this barren moonscape. Over time, as glaciers melted, water then invaded these crevices, froze, and expanded over each successive season, and separated the boulders. Since bare rocks do not have any soil cover, no rooted plants can colonize such an empty environment. Lichen is a symbiotic association between algae and fungi. The thalli of these lichens can colonize the surface of a barren rock. Since the lichen can absorb moisture from the atmosphere, they are able to colonize an otherwise uninhabitable landscape. These lichens produce acids, which slowly corrode the surface of the exposed rock, resulting in further disintegration of the rock. When the lichen die, the decomposing matter adds to the humus content of the environment, this promoting soil building, and the environment becomes suitable for the growth of foliose lichen. Foliose lichens have leaf-like thalli. They can absorb and retain more water than crustose lichen and are able to accumulate more dust particles. The roots penetrate the crevices of the rocks, secreting more acids, resulting in further disintegration of the rocks. These basic qualities add to the increase in soil formation. What's more, insects and spiders slowly colonize these environments, increasing the total biomass of the changing ecosystem. One can imagine the sight and smell of such an acidic environment, high in the Himalayas, barren and cold, except for the vast expanse of lichen-inhabited rock. This habitat slowly becomes suitable for the colonization of xerophytic moss, such as Polytrichum and Grimmia. The roots of these moss penetrate the already disintegrated rocks, further increasing the process. Mosses develop in patches. Since moss have more organic and inorganic content in their biomass, they add to the fertility of the soil. What's more, since mosses are spongy and moist, they attract more moisture and trap the wind-blown soil particles, adding to the soil layer. At this point, the ecosystem appears more green and lush, and the air would feel even more moist and smell more acidic, almost like walking through a dense bog. The sounds of insects buzzing throughout would dominate such an environment. The moss stage not only helps to increase the population of mosses, but also create conditions for the establishment of herb population. Herb roots penetrate even further into the rock-laden soil and enhances the disintegration process. Since herbs are leafy and have high organic matter in their biomass, they add to the organic content of the soil when they die. These leafy herbs provide shade in a once exposed environment, thus reducing evaporation of water in the soil. The increasingly moist soil attracts bacteria and fungi, which decompose the organic matter in the soil, increasing the soil fertility even more. As we can see, each successive community has higher biodiversity of plants and animal species. The increasing diversity of species adds to the overall biomass and thus adds to the soil fertility and formation. As soil develops, more and more plants and animal diversity can be supported in the environment. Initially, only a few shrubs will be able to colonize an herb-dominated environment. Over time, more and more shrubs will inhabit the area, attracting birds. Birds are crucial for increasing the richness of biodiversity in such an environment, helping to disperse seeds. Birds help expand the coverage of shrub species throughout the evolving habitat, increasing the biodiversity at an incredible rate. The shrub stage increases the soil depth, moisture, and fertility of the entire ecosystem, paving the the way for new flora and fauna communities. It's not a far stretch of the imagination to assume that sounds of birds attract even more wildlife to the area, and dispersal of larger tree seeds progresses. Now the environmental conditions favor the growth of trees, which establish themselves among the shrubs. The diversity of tree species depends on soil factors and the local environmental conditions. Trees not only influences biodiversity but also local climatic conditions. The tree canopy provides shade to the earth below where shade-loving shrubs exist as secondary vegetation. The leaf litter, decaying shrubs and trees support the rich diversity of bacteria, fungi, and other detritivores. An ecosystem is considered a climax community when the greatest amount of biodiversity populates an area. A climax community has the largest number of species, each being efficient competitors that can survive with limited resources. A healthy climax ecosystem may last for centuries, provided outside disturbances such as fire or severe storms are not too damaging. In a climax community, no species is more or less significant than another species. Each acts in their own unique way, serving to maintain a balance and harmony within the ecosystem. When left alone, an ecosystem can heal itself and create rich, dynamic state of balance. Each element in nature lives in accordance to their own unique niche, and balance is maintained as a result.
In the secondary succession, the species that invade depend on the condition of the soil, availability of water, the environment, and also the seeds or the other propagates present. Since soil is already there, the rate of succession is much faster and hence the climax is also reached more quickly. What is important to understand is that succession, particularly primary succession, is a very slow process taking maybe thousands of years for the climax to be reached. Another important fact is to understand that all succession, whether taking place in water or on land, proceed to a similar climax community, that is the mesic. From today's session, you have understood how ecological succession takes place in nature. Thank you for listening to the session.